Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. If you had any remaining doubts as to whether the Democrat Party is now fully on Marxist, their latest idea should remove any question about it. Democrats are now proposing taxation on unrealized capital gains. And they're doing this to pay for that. Actually, it's really $5 trillion, not $3.5. But when you add everything up, it ends up being $5 trillion. Who thinks it'll stop there? $5 trillion infrastructure bill, which has nothing to do with infrastructure, that they said is actually $0. Remember that? And it was going to be free. And that's a lie, obviously, because they're going to have to raise taxes in order to pay for it. Now, to explain this outrageous proposal in very simple terms, realize that not everybody may be familiar with the stock market and things like realized and unrealized gains. Maybe you have a pension, maybe you got a 401k, but it's kind of on autopilot and you're not really thinking that much about it. Or maybe you don't have either one of those things. So I don't want to assume that everybody understands the implications of this idea, but the first thing that you should know is that this Democratic proposal to tax unrealized gains, well, it's state-sanctioned theft. That's what it is, and unconstitutional, 16th Amendment. In fact, taxing unrealized gains is the kind of idea you might believe in if you're AOC or somebody who's been a politician their entire life and never owned a business like Barack Obama. Or if you're someone like Bernie Sanders who lived in a commune and wrote a zine that was his literally only private sector job, and his wife ran a girls' school into the ground, writes books about socialism, but then got rich in capitalist America despite never holding a respectable job. He actually used government to get rich, and he owns 3 houses. For real. So in other words, you would only propose something that dumb if you're a Marxist, which means you don't understand money or how wealth is created or how economies work in the least. And you don't really care or you don't really want to know. And what's frightening about this idea is that it's not just coming from the AOC wing of the Democrat Party. That's pretty much the whole party anymore, except Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema at this point. This idea is being sold to America by Janet Yellen. She's the U.S. Secretary of our Treasury. She's the former head of the Federal Reserve. So, in other words, she's supposed to be an economic, quote-unquote, expert, yet here she is selling the idea that the U.S. government should tax people's unrealized capital gains. So let's watch Yellen tell us about her nifty idea on how to fleece the rich and eventually you, and then we'll discuss what she means and what the implications would be. Watch.
I think what's under consideration is a proposal that Senator Wyden and the Senate Finance Committee have been looking at that would impose a tax on unrealized capital gains on liquid assets held by extremely wealthy individuals, billionaires.
So let's look at it like this. Say you buy an asset. Say you get like some Apple stock, right? And you buy 10 shares at $100 per share. That costs you $1,000. Well, lucky you, Apple comes out with a shiny new electric vehicle that runs circles around Teslas, and Wall Street loves it. So Apple stock doubles in the news, right? So now you have $2,000 of Apple stock. So congrats, you're up $1,000. But you have not sold the Apple stock. The $1,000 gain is unrealized because it's all on paper only. Janet Yellen wants to take a cut of that $1,000 that isn't actually even in your pocket yet, unless you sell it, unless you liquefy. So another way of putting it, you're up $1,000 at the craps table in Vegas, but you're still playing and you haven't cashed in your chips. But casino boss Janet Yellen walks over and takes 20% of your chips for the house. That would be insane. That's why it's called unrealized gains. It's not realized in your pocket yet. In case of the Apple stock and the casino chips, you haven't actually realized the gains. They're still sitting in an asset. They're not liquidated. It's not liquid cash money. So in the case of the Apple stock, $1,000 gain that you made hasn't been sold. Therefore, the gain isn't really yours, at least not yet. Just like the dollar value of the chips that you're holding at the craps table, those aren't yours until you cash out. And then you have a realized gain that can be taxed. This is why it's insane. So continue with the Apple example. Remember how you made that $1,000 unrealized gain in our example that we just gave? Well, Yellen could tax you on it. But what if the very next day the stock takes a hit? Maybe it turns out that Apple electric cars aren't so great after all, and the news sends your stock spiraling down again. Now you're down $500. So the government taxed you on Apple stock gains that you never had or realized, but on top of that, now at least on paper, you've also lost money on your Apple investment. This is also why it's insane. And that proves that Democrats understanding that they are spending America into oblivion and they're looking to fund it with any tax scheme possible, no matter how ridiculous. And what they're hoping for are two things. First, that this is a bunch of financial jargon that most Americans won't understand or care about. The real thing, though, that they're counting on is that they can play off envy and hatred for the rich. That's the second thing. They want to sell this as something that they only intend to do to billionaires. So here's Yellen telling us exactly that. Watch.
It would help get at capital gains, which are an extraordinarily large part of the incomes of the wealthiest individuals. And right now, escape taxation until they're realized, and often they're unrealized, and at death benefit from so-called step-up of basis. So it's not a wealth tax, but a tax on unrealized capital gains of exceptionally wealthy individuals.
That's a total con job, saying that it's a tax only for billionaires. Remember 15 days to slow the spread? Now we're talking about face painties forever, mandated jabs, endless boosters, digital passports, a license to move. That's what the Vax Pass is. No insight in sight. And that's how the left works. They propose something, they make it sound small at first, and they try to entice you by saying it's not going to affect you much, at least for now. And then when they know that it's introduced and once accepted, they eventually roll out taxing unrealized gains to everyone. By the way, they've never ever proposed one thing related to taxation and then stopped there, ever. Maybe you got a classic car sitting in your driveway. Maybe you have a piece of art on your wall. Maybe you have some Tesla stock that you saved up to buy. Imagine its value went up. Now Janet Yellen wants to tax you on it, even though you haven't sold it. The painting's still on your wall. Taxing unrealized gains has the effect of discouraging startups, and it's really asset seizure. Think about it. Many startups compensate their employees with stock options rather than high salaries. And the startup employees would owe tax on stock they haven't even sold and don't even know if that stock is going to be worth anything, since startups go bust all the time. So taxing unrealized gains completely inhibits innovation. And it also causes massive sell-offs in the stock market, especially around tax time every year. Think about all the people that have to liquidate part of their stocks to pay taxes on their unrealized gains. That would tank the market. It would make the Great Depression look like, an appetizer. That would hurt pensions, 401ks, 529s, and really everybody. As bad as a bad stock market, it's not good for anybody. And don't believe that Democrats only intend to do this to the rich. They tried to allow the monitoring of all transactions over $600 in your bank account. They're still arguing about moving the threshold for the year to $10,000 easily. That still applies to everybody. So why do you think the IRS wants to do this? Because they want to tax all those transactions, and they want to see where they're going and when they happen. Now, $600, for instance, that's not exactly Bill Gates and Elon Musk level money that's being targeted. It's because it's you they're targeting. See, once they make taxing unrealized gains legit for billionaires, they'll do it for you too. I'm not for raising taxes at all. I'm not even for taxes. I think the whole damn thing's unconstitutional and the IRS should be abolished. Even a tax on corporations is a tax on you. They just pass the bill to you. And you can go ahead and tax the billionaires all day. You're never going to make up that deficit. It's just less money those billionaires invest and spend in the private sector, which employs Americans. And if you want the billionaires to pay more, just raise their cap gains taxes. And when they sell off some of that stock, tax them more. At least then they'll have actual realized cash gains in their hands. Look, she's saying that this isn't a wealth tax, and that's a lie. Here is the absolute definition of a wealth tax. It's a wealth tax. It's a tax levied on the net fair market value, here's a quote, of a taxpayer's assets. A wealth tax applies to the net fair market value of all or some of a variety of assets types held by taxpayers, including cash, bank deposits, stock shares, fixed assets, personal cards, that artwork on your wall, real property, pension plans, money funds, owner-occupied housing, and trusts, end quote. So taxing unrealized gains is the exact same thing as a wealth tax. And again, this is Janet Yellen, the person in charge of the U.S. Treasury, suggesting this idea. This is seizure. This is seizure of assets. You have to liquidate to even pay. You'd have to sell off your stuff to pay the tax on the gains, the unrealized gains. This is the person currently presiding over a national debt of $30 trillion. That's the real debt we owe. I mean, we owe it, our kids owe it, our grandkids owe it, because we'll all be long gone and everybody will still be paying it off. And to put it in perspective, to count to $1 trillion, it takes about, 31,000 years? For real, yeah. Democrats want to spend $3.5, really $5 trillion more. That's the problem. They want to spend money that they don't have, and they expect you to sell off everything you own to satisfy it. But they tell you it's not going to cost $1 because, of course, it will cost you all of your dollars. And they intend to get all of your dollars from you with these kinds of cunning schemes. The main one will be just to tell you that they're going after the rich people's money. And then what they're going to do is play off your envy. They're going to make you commit a moral failing, and then they're going to play off of it to make you okay with their seizure. But don't forget, once they go after those assets, they will come after yours. It always happens. And once everybody takes the bait, they'll come for everybody next. Because money's real, even if unrealized gains are not. And when you spend $3.5 trillion that you don't have, you got to pay for it eventually, or you go bust. Spending money without generating real wealth, that's the communist Marxist model. It's a model that ignores things like debt until the inevitable collapse comes. It's Marxism in practice. It could be a collapse that happens overnight like it did in '89 when the Soviet Union imploded economically in just a few days after 69 years. Or it could be a long and slow economic death like Cuba's. But either way, a government that confiscates its people's wealth and spends more than can be generated by the private sector can only do that until the money runs out. And it always runs out. Taxing unrealized gains is the move of a government that has no intention of living beneath its means. It's way over its skis, spending way too much, and Janet Yellen is looking to the only place she can pay for it, the private sector and the so-called rich. Because the government can't create wealth, it only spends everybody else's, or prints money until your money's worthless and we're totally bankrupt. Yellen will start with billionaires if she's allowed to implement this tax scam, and they're negotiating it this week. Remember, we got a stopgap that goes up until December. And when this isn't enough, and it won't be, because you could confiscate everybody's wealth in the country and it's still not going to come close to making up that debt. And it won't be. She'll move to you. We're watching the attempt to turn to, this is economic suicide, is what is being engineered here. It's turning the greatest economy ever created into America, here in America, into an indebted welfare state. This is the goal of Marxism. This is the supposed war against the rich, but it's a war against you. And soon it will be your unrealized gains, your future that they want. And they're praying they can make it happen before you realize it. So up next, the woke mob is coming for America's founders, just like we all predicted. We'll tell you how Thomas Jefferson was canceled in New York City and how the frontrunner for New York City mayor is on board with the move. That's straight ahead. The Social Security Administration's computer servers are 45 years old. Computer servers at Health and Human Services are 50. Maybe this is how cyber criminals hacked the U.S. Census Bureau's computers, where everything about you is stored. The threat of some cyber thief stealing your credit card isn't your biggest risk. Your massive risk is that they take ownership of your home, and this is called home title theft. The FBI calls it one of the fastest growing crimes. Cyber criminals simply hack into vulnerable government, bank, or mortgage company servers where copies of your home's title is stored. They forge your signature stating that you sold your home to them, and they can borrow on your home and leave you in debt. You won't know until collection notices show up. Protect your most valuable asset and visit HometitleLock.com, register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim, and use promo code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. That's HometitleLock.com, promo code RADIO. Welcome back to the program. So it appears the woke mob has come for another part of American history. New York City is set to remove a statue of Thomas Jefferson from City Hall after the woke cancel crowd, City Council, deemed that Jefferson owning slaves was enough to erase him as a respected founding father who wrote the Declaration of Independence. So this topic came up in the New York City mayoral debate between Democrat Eric Adams and Republican Curtis Silva. Both of them delivered very different answers on whether or not they'd remove the statue. Watch.
Looking for yes or no here, candidates. Do you agree the statue should be removed? Mr. Sliwa.
Absolutely not, although they've made their decision. The idea now would be to repurpose and find a place for Thomas Jefferson, who created our Declaration of Independence.
Thank you, Mr. Sliwa. Mr. Adams.
You find a difficult time to follow instructions? Yes. As you asked me, yes, it should have been removed.
Alex Lee was answer. Joining me now to discuss the left's latest war on statues is Jarrett Stepman. He's been covering this story as a contributor for the Daily Signal. He's also author of The War on History, The Conspiracy to Rewrite America's Past. Jarrett, thanks for joining us. So it's weird because these are the same people who idolize Che Guevara. They have Che on T-shirts, and he's never been canceled. And Jefferson, Jefferson gets canceled, though. This is all a part, this is like the Americanized Maoist cultural revolution. Tell us about this.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, what a slide that we've had in the last few years. How many great figures of America's past have been put on the chopping block And now we get to a man, Thomas Jefferson, who many see as the very symbol of Americanism, of 1776, the Declaration of Independence, the document that really is, for many, the very soul of this country. I think it's telling that they're going after Jefferson at this time, not just the man, but the ideas that the man stood for, because that's what this is about. It's not about the individuals in history who are being canceled, who are being erased. It's about the great ideas that they stood for. And it's about the Americans today who still believe in those ideas. They still believe in those ideals and want to stick to them. That's what's being erased. That's what's being canceled.
Yeah, and the logic of this too, and this is all about obviously trying to taint the ideal of America and the founding principle of America. And if they can go ahead and taint the founding fathers as being these irredeemable people who are completely full of faults, then by extension, the principles in which they believe must also be equally with fault, which is, it's illogical, but that's the association that really Marxists in society are trying to push with all the CRT and the and completely deconstructing America to remake it into whatever they want. Is that going to work? I mean, really, are people buying into it that much, or do they just not care about statues anymore?
I think this is really an elite-driven phenomenon. They've, of course, used the woke mobs in the streets to tear down statues. But if you look at poll after poll, the idea of actually tearing down American statues and American history, it is very unpopular. This is being driven by people in the New York City Council, frankly, people who are Lilliputians compared to the greatness of Thomas Jefferson. I think most Americans understand this. I think, unfortunately, America's elite ruling class doesn't at all. They want you to forget men like Thomas Jefferson. They want you to think that the only things that matter are diversity, equity, and inclusion, not great triumphs, not the principles of liberty that undergird this country from its beginning. Regardless of the imperfections of our country, there's no question that the ideas and the very real actions of Jefferson and so many others is what made this country great, and they want you to forget that.
Yeah, they want you to forget that, and they want you to think that people who are not perfect are incapable of coming up with principles that can work perfectly if followed. I mean, it's guilt by association.
It is really guilt by association. And frankly, especially when I see Thomas Jefferson being toppled, Abraham Lincoln said that Jefferson's words would always be a stumbling block to tyranny the world over. And I think it's funny because, of course, Abraham Lincoln is now under consideration for canceling too. And I think how true that is. I mean, Jefferson's words stand against the woke tyrants. They stand against the principles of the CCP, communist China. This is what this country stands for. I mean, at this very basic level, I think people around the globe understand that, who truly understand America. To get rid of these figures is to stick a stake in the heart of what has made America itself for over 2 centuries. And I think that these woke activists, the iconoclasts who want to purge American history, they know this. And I think it's sad that many, especially as these statues began to come down, never understood this. They never understood what these, frankly, woke totalitarians really want.
And how are the people that these iconoclasts idolize? They're not any. I mean, in many respects, they're way worse because we're in modern era, and a lot of the people that they worship, they see the moral failings of some of the ideals that used to not weigh as much negatively in the past, but yet they celebrate these people who I think are worse.
Yeah, how many excuses have we heard for Fidel Castro and these other tyrants around the globe? There's almost a bottomless well of excuses for their failures, for their, frankly, evil of many of these men. And yet we pick and pull at founding fathers, at George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, I mean, countless others at this point, men who did great things, who did bring a great deal of liberty and prosperity to millions of people, not only in their own generation, but in the generations that followed them, that created this great country. That is treated with all suspicion, although we're supposed to think that, well, Fidel Castro, he did a few things wrong, but how about that health care? I think it's ridiculous. It shows
the
double
reading
standard
program
in place.
Yeah, he taught kids to read. Fidel Castro apparently personally sat down on the circular rug there for sharing time and brought his own book and apparently taught everyone to read. That makes everything that he did okay. I remember that line being pushed to us a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. But again, the excuses for tyrants, for real tyrants, are almost endless in this debate. And no figure from our past can be forgiven for even the smallest imperfection. I think it shows what they're really about. I think that this debate, this iconoclasm, you almost can't debate it on its merits. They don't care about the differences between Jefferson Davis and Thomas Jefferson at this point. It all must go. It's all bad. It's all evil. It all must be taken down, whether you like it or not.
And to your point, for instance, Robert E. Lee, and and I say this to somebody, my husband's family. I mean, his great grandfather, great great grandfather was a prisoner at Andersonville. He was like one of the very few people. He was kept as a POW by the Confederacy, and yet I read all of this stuff about Robert E. Lee and all of the nuance. Like, he didn't really want to fight for the Confederacy, but he did not want to turn against his home state, and he actually had been invited to lead the Union's army by Lincoln, and all of that is left out. Like, there's none of the struggle of the decision that he had before him, which I think, if we're talking about history, that kind of stuff is important.
It's critical, and it's the nuance that frankly escapes the minds of the totalitarians, the woke totalitarians. They don't want you to know that nuance. They don't want you to think about it. It's not just about Lee and the Confederacy. It's about the generations of Americans who had to rebuild this country after a bloody civil war, the lessons that we've learned since then. I mean, it's a remarkable thing that we still have a United States of America today. It's really because of men like Abraham Lincoln and Robert E. Lee, who was absolutely for reconciliation after the war. These things are going to be forgotten by future generations, and that's what worries me very deeply. We have an absolutist attitude. If you're not with our movement, if you're not with the vast movement for diversity, equity, and inclusion, you're going to be erased. You're going to be eliminated. You're going to be unpersoned. And I think it's about more than just the statues and the history. It's directed towards those in American society today who they see as enemies, who they see as equally cancelable as Thomas Jefferson and Robert E. Lee and all these other historical figures.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Well, and The War on History, a great book, and I worry too, last question for you, Jarrett, I worry about how much of this is being omitted from our kids' history books. The history that our kids are learning about today, because when you remove all of this stuff, I mean, for instance, like the statues of Confederate leaders and people, this is even totally separate issue from what people thought of their motivations for entering conflict. But the reason that the statues and some of these names existed was because, as you just mentioned with Robert E. Lee, I mean, there was discussions of reconciliation. There had to be an agreement that was fostered between the Union and Confederate states in order for that reconciliation to take place, to heal the nation, et cetera, and that was one of the conditions of it. And it's amazing how nobody teaches, like, this is why we did certain things. This is why this statue exists. This is why this person made this move. And to prove your point, this is not about history or education. It's Marxism.
It is. And I wonder, too, especially for those who say, well, let's put all the statues in a museum. What are the museums going to be teaching? I mean, what are these institutions? What are the schools going to be teaching? I think that is such a critical part of this. I mean, they're a part of the woke revolution, too. If anything, they're leading the charge. And I think that's the real issue here, is that a generation of young Americans, I encourage those who still care about their country's history to teach their kids outside these institutions, to teach them about what Jefferson and what this country stood for, teach them about the nuance of our history. That's critical. That's vital. We're at this precipice right now where in the future, if things continue to go the way they are, they're not going to get any of that. They're not even be able to read books that disagree with what the narrative of the regime is. And that's a terrifying thing. That's what Thomas Jefferson, the founding fathers, set out to create. They'd create a country that wouldn't be like that, where people would be free, where they'd have religious liberty, where they'd all have all the other kinds of liberties that we often take for granted. That's what's at stake here. That's what's at stake in the war on history.
Completely agree. Jarrett Stepman, appreciate your book, appreciate what you do. Thanks so much for joining us. Good to talk with you.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Up next, folks, we're taking the woke out of jokes with comic illustrator Ethan Van Sciver. He's worked with DC and Marvel, and of course, wait till you hear what he has to say about that story. Remember the redefined version of Superman and the slogan? Well, he explains all of that and discusses it, breaks it down, coming up next. Keep it here. Thanks to Biden's economic policies, job numbers have been abysmal and inflation is skyrocketing. And instead of following the previous president's pro-business agenda that had the economy booming, Biden wants to tax corporations and pass trillion-dollar bills that we can't pay for. It's time for you to take proactive steps to protect your wealth and retirement by investing in gold and precious metals, and Legacy Precious Metals can help. Washington continues to print money to pay for their outrageous bills, but that just simply devalues your dollar. Gold offers you a hedge against inflation. And as the dollar gets weaker, gold gets stronger. The folks at Legacy Precious Metals are the gold standard when it comes to investing in precious metals. They have a team of experts who can counsel you on the best options for you and your family. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Call Legacy Precious Metals at 866-580-2088 or visit them online to download their free investor's guide full of useful info at legacypminvestments.com. Wokery has gotten out of control, and one of the most fascinating things is not just how fast it's spread, but where it has spread. So last week we told you about how Superman's son came out as bi, which is apparently incredibly important to how he fights bad guys. And now Superman's motto, truth, justice, and the American way, has changed to truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. So why? Comic artists who help create these characters are pushing back and speaking up about how these woke changes aren't just ruining comics, but culture. And there's a very interesting caveat about the slogan, too. Ethan Van Sciver, he's one of those artists. He joined me on my radio program and broke this down. Watch.
Ethan, pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Well, this is a real pleasure. I appreciate it. I'm a big fan, so it's nice to be on the show.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm a big fan of what you do. And this is why when I see, people of your stature in this industry that speak out on this, I mean, when the people who are creating the worlds that we see and who are bringing them to life and who are, however, in whatever aspect, that's pretty significant. Talk to me a little bit about this, because I know you've tweeted about it extensively, and there's been a lot of feedback that we've gotten since talking about this story from around the country and our markets around the country from folks. Did you see? I mean, how do you react to this? Because it's Superman. This is where people go for an escape, and now you can't escape anything anywhere.
No, it's so typical. I mean, the industry, the comic book industry, like a lot of other industries that are kind of hobby based, that are, for kids, that are all about raising kids with a sense of morals and who they're supposed to be, have been invaded by these social justice warriors. They're radical left-wing activists. And for some reason, these big corporations are allowing them. I think they're hiring them on purpose at this point. I think that it's part of the agenda. And DC Comics held out for a long time. Marvel Comics went woke way back in 2014 or 2015. DC Comics kind of held out. But recently, they were purchased by a bigger corporation, AT&T, which is like $171 billion in debt. And so they purchased Warner Media, which includes DC Comics, for the intent purpose, I guess, of trying to get out of debt. And the first thing that they did was they fired everybody that I knew in editorial that was holding out against woke. Fired them. All of the editorial, all of the people that I worked with, gone, and replaced them with activists who are now one by one changing all of these characters and into woke diversity versions of these characters. Wonder Woman is now gay. Aqualad is now gay. Robin is gay. The new thing, Superman is gay. Catwoman is gay. Poison Ivy.
Catwoman?
Catwoman, yes. I mean, that's shocking, isn't it? I thought she had a thing with Batman.
Yeah, I thought she had a thing with Batman. I mean, it is, and we're talking with Ethan Van Sciver, who is an illustrator, and he's worked with DC, and he's helped bring all these characters to life over the years. I mean, I understand the argument that people have when they're like, oh, I want representation and whatever. Why can't you create your own thing? Why do you have to rewrite canon?
Well, that's a good question. They've announced that they're going to do a black Superman and a black Batman. They're going to be making movies about these new versions of those characters. And I've asked them, I've said, back in 1993, they hired a whole collection of like amazing African-American creators who created something called Milestone Comics, brand new African-American superheroes who everybody loved, but they didn't sell well enough. And so DC Comics kind of just shelved those characters and those creators And even though fans have been asking for those milestone creators to come back with their characters for 25 years now, they're not for some reason. And I think it's because those creators have a piece of those characters, and DC's going to have to shell out money to them. Wow. Instead, why not do diversity this way? By taking characters that we own more of and then turning them into diverse versions of those characters. Save a little money. And a lot of this is about copyright and trademark issues. A lot of it is. The truth, justice, and the American way line that everybody loves, they lost the trademark to it. It was a trademark line.
What? How do you lose? Who dropped that ball? How do you lose that trademark?
It's not their, I want to blame them, but it's not their fault. It just became generic. So, you could say, hey, this is the Danish show. We're all about truth, justice, and the American way. It's like aspirin. Everybody uses that phrase now. DC Comics, according to the USPTO, can no longer trademark that phrase. They still have faster than a speeding bullet, but they lost it, and they were embarrassed about it. They've been hiding the fact that they lost it since 2006. And if you remember the Superman Returns movie, okay, there was a scene where Perry White goes, Superman, he's all about truth, justice, and all that other stuff, right?
Oh my god.
They were embarrassed of it.
That is all like resonating with me right now. And I did not even notice that at the time. I did not even notice it.
Everybody was frustrated by it. We all kind of went, what's going on? Why are you ashamed of America all of a sudden, DC? Well, I think they feigned a little bit more in that direction. They had Superman renounce his American citizenship, and I think 2010 it was. Said he no longer wanted to be an instrument of American foreign policy. Stop. It's like Superman. Don't think of Superman that way. Superman he represents what's wonderful about America. He represents the fact that we have power, terrific, amazing power. We were raised with American values, and we fight against tyranny. That's what Superman's meant to be. That's what America is. That's what the American way is.
Exactly.
Individualism.
It almost feels weird to say I'm glad it's more of a trademark issue than the wokery issue, at least although him say, as you were just saying, Superman renouncing his citizenship and all of that stuff. That doesn't, and that's the thing, the activists and everybody that they all get involved in this, and then they feel like they have to like rewrite these characters. To me, that seems insulting to the representation and their objective, because they're limiting themselves to what is already created instead of, and I understand that with, now with AT&T owning all of this, that it might be, a monetary issue. But think of, if they write a really good character, that would go crazy. People are starved for good original content. Hell, that's why I started watching anime during lockdown, because I couldn't find anything good and original anymore. So I became like this anime like monster, and I was embarrassed about it at first. Now I don't care. I love it. But talk to us a little bit about that, because there's so many more ideas out there, and it just is like just trying to work in the confines of what's already created. That's not fun.
No, it isn't. But these are corporate characters now. It's no longer about creativity. All they're doing is pumping out propaganda. And one has to wonder, I'm gonna blow your mind here a little bit, and I want you to think about this. This is just a theory I have, okay? And this is what I do on my YouTube channel. I theorize, and I tend to be right. I happen to know that there are woke librarians who actually receive taxpayer funding and then spend that money on small press companies and say, if you hired these woke creators to make James Bond into a transgendered black woman, then we will buy a whole gross of these books, of these graphic novels, to stock in our libraries. This is a fact. This is actually going on right now. Okay, so there's a lot of this kind of SJW, far left-wing radical propaganda disguised as graphic novels appearing in public libraries.
Librarians.
That's right. So, wait a second. Is this happening on a bigger level? Okay, is it possible that these big corporations who are terribly in debt are receiving money from the government to make propaganda out of superheroes?
Ooh.
I think it deserves a little investigation, and that's what I'm going to do on my YouTube channel.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I think I'm right.
I want to watch and listen to that for sure, because it wouldn't be the first time the government's done stuff like this. I think of all of the propaganda in World War I and World War II. Those were, I mean, it was
Yes.
propaganda, but they were cool looking propaganda posters, and they weren't mean. It was like, ladies, do your hair in victory rolls and plant your victory garden. And my favorite was, if you're not carpooling, then you're riding with Hitler. That was an actual poster that they had. It was legit, was a real poster that they put out. So it was kind of, I mean, there was one common enemy. Now, and that's the other thing, the world seems to be so reduced with this, and my mind is completely blown that I feel like we now need to get more people in librarian services. That's like a science. What is it, library science or something like that? We're missing, as independent thinkers. We need to also conquer that area too. But it does feel like all of the fights and everything that all of the social justice warriors have, they're diminishing the big good versus evil fights that you're able to have in these amazing, fantasy spaces and in the world of comics. They're reducing everything down to fighting because, over gender recognition or who someone's boyfriend or girlfriend is. And oh my gosh, like, can we aim higher?
No, Dana. See, they're good and we're evil. That's the entire point of everything that they want to say. That's what it comes down to. Liberal, far left wing. I don't even want to say liberal anymore. I know.
Liberals. Yeah, because it's an insult to classical liberals. Yeah.
Yes, far left wing radicals are good guys. They are good people, and we are bad people, and we're just going to have to deal with that through every aspect of entertainment that we used to enjoy. And that's just the way it's going to be. They just announced today that the Amazons on Paradise Island, where Wonder Woman grew up, are trans.
What?
Yes, it doesn't make any sense.
That completely, you know what? No, screw that. Screw that, because they were amazing, strong women who kicked ass, and I refuse to accept this. They're robbing women of, like, iconic female characters. No, I will riot. I've never rioted before. Not sure how that will work, but we'll figure something out.
We don't know how.
You're kidding me.
Conservatives. We don't know how to riot. Sorry.
Yeah, we don't. Like, would you knock over some of the coffee displays somewhere, or like kick a sweater set at the Gap? I don't even know what that.
I think you hold a sign and yell. And march
that's
in
true.
A circle,
yeah,
right?
just politely though. Like, don't oppress us, please, with our signs. So now they're doing. I'm sorry, I interrupted you because you just kind of blew my mind for a second. I go ahead and please continue. I apologize.
Well, I mean, that's just it. I mean, that every single day, DC Comics is currently on a they want to do more with gender. They want to do more with sexual identity. And again, this is all stuff that's aimed at your kids. Understand, this is comics. We talk about them. We still enjoy them. We're adults. I make them. I make them for a living. But all of this is aimed at socially engineering your children. That's why there are woke librarians buying this stuff and stocking it in public school libraries where your second grader can get a hold of it. They know what your kids are listening to, reading, looking at. They want to change your kids. We look at it as adults and we get angry because we're diverted. We're worried about, what about good stories?
Yeah.
And of course, it's not even about that. It's about changing who you are, changing who your kids are, and reaching your kids where you can't.
Wow.
Unless you can make comic books. You want to join me and make comic books?
I cannot draw for anything, but I will totally serve as in any capacity that I can. It'll be the worst comic book you've ever seen. And I can't color very well either. I'm not. I know where my skill set is, man. I'm nowhere. I can't even compare. So, Ethan, we're out of time, but I would love to have you back because this is huge, and I think that this is a huge culture dictates everything. And I think that this is like one of the most important issues. And so I would love to have you back. And I'm definitely going to check out your YouTube channel when you dive down that rabbit hole and look at all of the propaganda, because that's fascinating. Ethan Van Scrivener. I'm not even saying Scrivener. Now I'm talking about my writing app that I use for the love. I'm always like either someone's Twitter handle or their first name. So Ethan, I appreciate you joining us. Love to have you back. Thank you so much, my friend. Appreciate what you do.
My pleasure. Anytime.
You can watch more from that interview on my Dana Lash YouTube page and official Dana Lash on Facebook. So coming up, we've got even more fallout from the January 6th riot and the left's feeble attempts to spin it as the worst event since 9/11. And we'll tell you why they're wrong. Again, keep it here. Big tech is taking advantage of us because we consented to being a product. And while they mine, sell, and remine our data, they're counting their money and abusing our privacy. So if you really think that your emails and your texts and your messages are private and safe from governments or hackers or corporations who want to make money off you, their product, think again. This is where Secure comes in. Secure's email platform is 100% safe. It's Swiss hosted and has no ties to the big tech companies here in the US. And with Secure, there is no data mining whatsoever. That's what makes Secure different. When it comes to security and privacy, Secure is just unmatched. And there's a reason that Secure built their company the way that they did. So take a stand and take back your privacy. Use discount code Dana and Secure will only cost you $7.50 a month for full access. So visit secure.com today and create your secure email address and account. Don't forget code Dana for 25% off for the whole year. That's secure, SEKUR.com, promo code Dana for 25% off. The Capitol riot is one riot we must never forget, according to Democrats. So, of course, they won't let you forget it. Now they've breathlessly hyped up January 6th from the beginning. The media told us that multiple police officers died. It turns out none of the Capitol Police died because of the riot. Democrats said it was an armed insurrection. Turns out no one was armed. And there will be no charges of an insurrection because the FBI, the corrupt FBI that desperately wanted indictments, the FBI itself, has said there was no insurrection following a detailed investigation. The chief Democrat, Joe Biden, said it was the worst attack on the Capitol since the Civil War. I mean, he even went past the Democrats bombing it in the 70s. We nearly lost our cherished democracy, the left says. The truth is, the more the narrative collapses about January 6th, the more Democrats try to find some new angle to milk about January 6th. They formed a commission hoping the story will be ongoing, just like the Russia investigation that hung over the Trump administration for the entirety of 4 years. And now Rolling Stone magazine, yes, the people who turned Tiger Beat for one of the Boston bombers, they're doing their best to fan any remaining ember from that January 6th riot into a flame. They're doing their part. Now, here's the headline. Quote, exclusive January 6th protest organizers say they participated in dozens of planning meetings with members of Congress and White House staff, end quote. Now, remember, this is the same Rolling Stone that literally made up a story about gang rape at the University of Virginia. And then they had a massive retraction for it. This is the same Rolling Stone that completely made up the ivermectin overdose story that claimed hospitals were overwhelmed in Oklahoma. That turned out to also be a total lie. No retraction yet. So now Rolling Stone wants us to believe that members of Congress and White House staff planned January 6th, suggesting they're somehow responsible for the breach of the Capitol building. And the story reads like a bad article in the Inquirer. A source said this, another source said that. They called anonymous sources organizer and planner, which sounds super inventive. The journalism has fallen off of a cliff at Rolling Stone. So in any case, organizer and planner claimed that they had conversations about the demonstrations with Congressman Paul Gosar, Madison Cawthorn, Lauren Boebert, Mo Brooks, Andy Biggs, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Louis Gohmert. Of course, nothing, literally nothing in the article indicates that any of these congressional members did anything wrong and that all of these conversations were public. They had no conversations about a demonstration, by the way, which people have a right to do. And in any case, maybe the real story is that Rolling Stone is trying very hard to keep the attention off this story from the Revolver, from Revolver Mag. The headline reads, quote, meet Ray Epps, the Fed-protected provocateur who appears to have led the very first 1/6 attack on the U.S. Capitol, end quote. Now, for a while, it's been known that the FBI had informants on the ground that day at the Capitol, but it's possible that it's much worse than that. Ray Epps is shown instigating and inciting the breach on the Capitol. He even appears as a key person on the FBI's most wanted list that they end up taking him off. And though the internet quickly identified the man as Ray Epps, the FBI never got around to actually arresting him and the other people he was with. But they've arrested hundreds of other small players, but not this main dude. That looks to be like the core leader, I guess, if they're looking for one, of the raid on the Capitol. Even more bizarrely, Revolver reports that Ray Epps was quietly purged from that most wanted list like he never existed. I don't know, is he an infiltrator? Perhaps maybe there's more about January 6th than meets the eye. It's not like this hasn't happened before. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie asked AG Merrick Garland about the mysterious Ray Epps just last week, and a very uncomfortable Merrick Garland suddenly broke eye contact and declined to answer. So maybe Rolling Stone is just playing with stupid stories with no substance. They're really actually repackaging public information already. The last paragraph of that story actually states that they were simply talking about votes and that they had zero discussions about demonstrations. They want to distract you from the real story behind the events of this. So they even discredited their own headline in their story. It's old public knowledge that they're trying to use to repackage and claim something else about it. It's Rolling Stone. These people can't even pick a 100 top rock song list. So can you expect them to do this either? No, something else to think about. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.